December 14th, 2020. A phone rings inside a Berlin apartment. On one end, a man believed to be an FSB officer calmly explains how Alexei Navalny was poisoned, where the nerve agent was applied, and when he was supposed to die mid-flight over Siberia. He speaks the way someone describes routine maintenance: bored, precise, ready to move on. On the other end of the line is the man he's confessing to. The target is alive, recording everything, pretending to be his killer's supervisor. This conversation should not exist. Navalny didn't find these phone numbers. An unemployed blogger in Leicester did. No degree, no clearance, no government backing, just a laptop, public databases, and an obsession with open-source evidence. Within 3 years, that same blogger accused a nuclear superpower of shooting down a passenger jet with 298 people on board, identified Russian intelligence officers behind assassinations in Europe, and mapped a secret FSB death squad operating across multiple cities. Russia responded by banning its own soldiers from social media, declaring his organization a threat to national security, and launching lawsuits designed to bankrupt him. Governments tried to discredit him. None succeeded, because he published everything, every source, every method, every step, so anyone could verify it. How did a man with no credentials become the most persistent threat to Russian intelligence? And what happened when the Kremlin decided to fight back? 2012, Leicester. English city best known for a football club and a king buried under a car park. Not the kind of place you launch a global investigation from. Eliot Higgins sits in it, unemployed. A former finance and admin worker whose position vanished and left behind a toddler, a laptop, and an alarming amount of free time. He left school early. He holds no degree in intelligence, journalism, or international relations. The world insists expertise requires institutions, clearances, corner offices, and acronyms on a lanyard. Higgins has broadband and a stubbornness that looks, from the outside, and indistinguishable from obsession. Then, Syria collapses. The Arab Spring curdles into civil war and the internet floods with shaky phone footage, rockets arcing into apartment blocks, smoke columns climbing over Homs and Aleppo, screams layered under static. Everyone shares the videos. Almost nobody verifies them. The footage becomes wallpaper, horrifying, ambient, and useless as evidence. Higgins makes a mistake that reshapes his life. He pauses a clip, frame by frame, and tries to identify the weapon. Not to feel something, not to perform outrage, to know what is true. He stares at munition casings the way a jeweler stares at a stone, looking for the flaw that reveals the origin. He cross-references the terrain behind the smoke against satellite imagery and open-source maps. He plays the most obsessive matching game on Earth. Where was this filmed? When and with what? It is slow. It is tedious. It looks, to anyone watching over his shoulder, like a man destroying his eyesight for no paycheck. That is precisely why it works. Every clip carries tells. Every explosion obeys physics. Every missile has a silhouette that belongs to a manufacturer, a model, a country of origin. Every uploader leaves a digital footprint, and every liar, given enough rope and enough internet, gets sloppy. He publishes under the pseudonym Brown Moses, a front-room hobby that hardens into compulsion. Spreadsheets multiply. Browser tabs breed across 2 monitors. What looks like an accountant's nervous breakdown is actually a battlefield ledger tracking which weapons appear, where, when, and in whose hands. Then the ledger catches something ugly. Cluster munitions, the kind of weapons banned by over 100 nations for the way they shred civilian bodies turning up in Syrian neighborhoods. Human Rights Watch documents the same pattern independently. Journalists notice the most dangerous word in conflict reporting attaches itself to Higgins, useful. He is still a nobody. No intelligence agency briefs him. No editor assigns him a desk. He is that guy online, cross-referencing violence from a spare bedroom, posting receipts no one asked for, which means you cannot discredit him the usual way. You cannot say, trust him, he's cleared. You cannot say, ignore him, he's bought. All he offers is a method, and the evidence and anyone with a browser can check both. So he names the thing he is building after an old fable. A group of mice agrees to hang a bell on the cat so they can hear it coming. Everyone applauds the plan. Then the room goes quiet, because agreeing is easy. Volunteering is the part that gets you killed. Higgins volunteers. He launched Bellingcat in July 2014, funded through Kickstarter, and staffed by volunteers who share one conviction. If the evidence is public, the investigation should be too, and within days, the cat gets hungry. A jetliner falls from the sky over eastern Ukraine. 298 people die in a burst of shrapnel and fire. Russia says it was not responsible. Ukraine says the same. Every government has a theory shaped by its own interests. Nobody has proof that can survive a cross-examination. In Leicester, a blogger opens his laptop and asks the most dangerous question of the digital age. What if the evidence is already online, just scattered across 100 social media posts in a language he barely reads? How does a man with no security clearance reconstruct a missile's route across an international border? And what happens when the country that fired it discovers he is looking? July 17th, 2014. Malaysia Airlines Flight MH17, a Boeing 777 carrying 298 passengers and crew from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur, drops off radar at 33,000 feet over eastern Ukraine. Passport pages and children's shoes drift into sunflower fields in a war zone controlled by pro-Russian separatists. Armed men guard the wreckage. International forensic teams cannot walk in with clipboards. Evidence degrades by the hour. Witnesses scatter or go silent. Every faction, Kiev, Moscow, the separatists, has an incentive to shape the story before the facts harden. Russia floods the information space with competing narratives faster than anyone can fact-check them. Ukraine fires back. The internet becomes a hall of mirrors, and somewhere inside it lie 298 dead people who deserve a straight answer. Higgins ignores the speeches and looks at the pictures. A bystander in the town of Torres uploads grainy footage of a Buck surface-to-air missile launcher riding a lowboy trailer through the streets in broad daylight. Another person posts a photo from a second angle in a nearby town. A separatist-linked social media account boasts about shooting down a plane, then deletes the post when the target turns out to be civilian. Each piece alone proves nothing. Stitched together, they sketch a convoy route heading east. Higgins pins the internet to a map. A billboard visible in one frame, a bend in the road in another, a power line tower whose configuration matches satellite imagery, a shadow cast at an angle that betrays the hour. Town by town, photo by photo, he tracks the book launcher from separatist-held territory back toward the Russian border. Then the detail that converts suspicion into accusation. The launcher carries distinctive markings, scuffs on the side skirt, a pattern of wear that match images traced to a specific Russian military unit, the 53rd Anti-Aircraft Missile Brigade, based in Kursk, Russia. An unemployed blogger in central England has just accused a nuclear superpower of driving a weapon across an international border, firing it at a passenger jet carrying 298 civilians and driving it back. Russia responds by attacking the concept of evidence itself. Denials, deflections, fabricated counter-narratives with doctored radar data, alternative launch coordinates, claims that every photo is doctored and every witness compromised. Higgins does not argue louder, he argues cleaner. He publishes the full timeline, the geolocated coordinates, the source images with metadata and the reasoning chain, structured so anyone with a browser can replicate every step of the work. You do not have to trust him. You can verify him. That is the trap. Boring transparency, weaponized against a state that depends on confusion. If you find these stories of ordinary people using evidence to hold power accountable as gripping as I do, hit subscribe, because after missiles, the stakes shift from hardware to human targets. Years later, the Dutch-led joint investigation team stands before cameras and confirms it. The book that destroyed MH17 came from Russia's 53rd Brigade in Kursk. The institutions caught up to the blogger. Bellingcat's published and unpublished evidence had been provided to the official investigation, and Russia absorbs a lesson that reverberates through every intelligence service on Earth. Its parliament, the Duma, moves to restrict soldiers from using smartphones on duty and from posting online content that reveals units, deployments, or movements. Media coverage frames the legislation explicitly as a response to open-source investigations that exploited soldiers' digital traces. a legislative admission dressed in operational security language that a man with a laptop now occupies the battlefield, but legislation is defense. What comes next is an offense, because MH17 is about blame for a missile. What follows is about nerve agents, forged passports, and a hit team that believes it can vanish behind a cathedral spire. On March 4, 2018, a former Russian spy and his daughter collapsed on a bench in Salisbury, England. And two men carrying passports with nearly sequential serial numbers walk straight into a trap they do not yet know exists. What specific detail in those documents cracks the cover story wide open? And how does a nerve agent meant for one man end up killing a woman 40 miles away who never heard his name? Salisbury is a cathedral town. Quiet streets, tour groups, pub menus featuring the word "Hardy." Not the kind of place where a state-sponsored assassination unfolds in daylight. Which is why the scene on March 4, 2018 looks wrong the instant you see it. Two figures slump on a park bench in the city center. One is Sergei Skripal, a former GRU officer who defected to Britain. The other is his daughter, Yulia. Their bodies do not appear injured, they appear switched off. The word that leaks out of the hazmat perimeter is Novichok, a military-grade nerve agent engineered during the Soviet era to kill by hijacking the body's own chemistry. Its use on British soil is not just an assassination attempt. It is a message. We can reach you, we can touch you, and we can do it in public. 4 months later, the message's true cost lands. In nearby Amesbury, Dawn Sturgis sprays her wrist with what she believes is a discarded perfume bottle. UK authorities later state the bottle was the delivery device for the Novichok used on the Skripals. Sturgis collapsed on June 30, 2018 and died on July 8th. Her partner, Charlie Rowley, survives, barely. A nerve agent meant for a defector kills a civilian who never heard his name. London points at Moscow. Moscow shrugs. Then UK authorities release CCTV footage. Two men arriving from Russia, moving through Gatwick, Waterloo, the streets of Salisbury. Russia insists they are Alexander Petrov and Ruslan Boshirov, ordinary citizens. The cover story that follows is so brazen it loops into comedy. On Russian state television, the two men sit across from an interviewer and explain earnestly, with the rehearsed sincerity of bad dinner theater, that they traveled to Salisbury to admire the cathedral, its 123-meter spire specifically. They mention the spire unprompted, as though altitude is a personality trait. If you have ever heard a liar over-prepare, you recognize the cadence. Wikipedia cosplay delivered with a straight face. But mockery is not proof. Not against a state that can drown you in counter-narrative. So Higgins goes quiet and starts counting. 2 passport numbers, nearly sequential. That is not a coincidence. That is a batch, issued by the same office, probably on the same day. Bellingcat and its partner outlet The Insider pull threads from Russia's leaky bureaucracy. Passport databases, registration records, travel logs. The cover identities crack fast. Files carry classification warnings no civilian passport holds. Addresses trace back to military institutions. Boshirov is identified as Anatoly Chepiga, a GRU colonel decorated with Russia's highest military honor, Hero of the Russian Federation, earned during Special Forces operations. Petrov is identified as Alexander Mishkin, a GRU military doctor. And a third man, traveling under the name Sergei Fedotov, is identified as Denis Sergeyev, a senior GRU officer whose role, Bellingcat's reporting suggests, was coordination, not execution, not tourists. A 3-man operational cell with ranks, decorations, and specialties. Russia does what it always does when truth survives the first push. It scrubs the record. Profiles vanish. Awards get buried. Public databases undergo the digital equivalent of a crime scene cleanup. But the internet remembers, and investigators archive. Higgins is no longer proving war crimes in a distant fog. He is pointing at named, decorated operatives inside Russian military intelligence, men whose biographies are stitched into the fabric of the state itself. Governments can deny an accusation. They can wave away 2 men in a blurry photo. It is much harder to deny a colonel whose Hero of Russia citation sits in an archive that someone already copied. How long does a nuclear state tolerate being humiliated by a laptop? Because in August 2020, Russia does not just try to silence a critic abroad, it tries to erase its most dangerous critic at home, a man named Alexei Navalny, who boards a plane in Siberia and, halfway through the flight, starts dying. What connects the FSB unit that shadows Navalny to a chemical weapons program Russia claims does not exist? And why does Putin's own denial contain the seed of a confession? Alexei Navalny does not whisper dissent into foreign newspapers. He uploads it in HD with infographics, drone footage of oligarchs' palaces, and the kind of deadpan narration that turns billion-dollar corruption into a punchline. He names the yachts, the shell companies, the vineyard holdings, the exact officials who converted public money into private empires. His most viral investigation, a film about a palace allegedly built for Putin on the Black Sea coast, pulls over 100 million views on YouTube. He turns corruption into entertainment that spreads faster than fear. By 2020, the question inside the Kremlin is not whether Navalny is a nuisance. It is how you stop a man whose audience grows every time you threaten him. August 20th, 2020. Navalny boards a Pobeda Airlines flight from Tomsk to Moscow. Shortly after takeoff, something ruptures inside him. He staggers into the aisle, and the sound that comes from him is not political. It is a raw, involuntary scream that passengers later describe as unlike anything they have heard from a human being. Crew members scramble. The pilot diverts to Omsk. Navalny is rushed to Hospital Number 1 and placed into a medically induced coma. Russia floats explanations: a metabolic disorder, low blood sugar, a pre-existing condition, anything except what it looks like. Navalny's team fights for permission to move him. After 2 days of pressure, Germany flies him to Berlin. Doctors at the Charité hospital treat him. Military and civilian laboratories run independent tests. The result arrives like ice water. Navalny was poisoned with a nerve agent from the Novichok family, the same class of weapon used on the Skripals in Salisbury 2 years earlier. The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons later confirms it. Designated laboratories analyzed biomedical samples collected under strict chain of custody procedures and found biomarkers consistent with a cholinesterase inhibitor. Russia denies. Russia shrugs. And President Putin, asked publicly about the poisoning, delivers a line that haunts every transcript it appears in. If they had wanted to poison Navalny, they would have finished the job. Not, we didn't do it. Something closer to we're competent enough to do it properly. Authoritarian logic, delivered on camera. Navalny survives. But survival without accountability is just a template, a successful rehearsal for the next body. Bellingcat returns to the only terrain it controls: data. The team gathers what Russia cannot fully lock down: telecom metadata, travel booking records, patterns of movement that leak through bureaucratic cracks like smoke through a door left ajar. They map Navalny's movements the way you would map a heist. Flights, hotels, cities, timestamps, and repeat visitors who keep appearing in the background. A shadow materializes. Not one watcher, a rotation. Men who book flights that bracket Navalny's departures and arrivals. Men who check into the same cities within hours of his arrival and vanish within hours of his departure. Men with medical or chemical backgrounds. Men linked, according to Bellingcat and its reporting partners, to the FSB's Criminalistics Institute, a unit whose official forensic mandate, the investigation alleges, conceals chemical weapons expertise. At least 8 operatives trailing Navalny across multiple Russian cities for years, over and over, like a metronome ticking toward an outcome. You do not build a team of 8 for surveillance. You build it for an outcome. Bellingcat publishes the findings with CNN, Der Spiegel, and The Insider. Names, travel patterns, phone clusters, evidence structured to be checked, replicated, and argued with because that is the point. The Kremlin refuses to investigate itself. It calls the reporting fabrication and Navalny a puppet. But there is one missing piece: a voice on tape, a mistake so clean it punctures the fog. Without it, Putin can keep doing what power always does, lying until exhaustion passes for truth. Navalny is recovering in Berlin when he reads the Bellingcat report. He sees the names, He sees the phone numbers, and he grasps something terrifying in its simplicity. These men have been calling each other, which means they can be called. So he does what no rational person would do after surviving an assassination attempt. He decides to phone the machine that tried to kill him and ask how it works. If it fails, he alerts the very people who poisoned him that he is awake, lucid, and coming for them. If it succeeds, an officer trained in counterintelligence talks himself into history. Navalny picks up the phone. He dials, and the cat answers. How can open and verifiable evidence shift the balance of power against a state that relies on opacity and secrecy? December 14th, 2020. Navalny sits with a phone and a plan that feels like a felony. He uses numbers extracted from Bellingcat's telecom analysis. He spoofs the caller ID to make the call appear as though it originates from within the Russian security apparatus. He adopts the voice of a senior official, steady, bored, managerial, because that is the voice people obey in bureaucracies. Not passion, not threats. The droning authority of paperwork. He calls Konstantin Kudryavtsev, one of the operatives linked to the Tomsk poisoning operation, to consider the absurdity. A state spent years constructing a clandestine surveillance and assassination team. It deployed military-grade toxins. It weaponized secrecy, hierarchy, fear, and the vast machinery of the FSB. And the instrument that cracks it open is a phone call. Not a hacker exploit. Not a dead drop in a park. Social engineering and nerve, the same tools a con artist uses, wielded by the man the con was supposed to bury. Around him, the room holds the silence of a courtroom, waiting for a verdict. Bellingcat's researchers sit nearby, not as puppet masters, but as the people who assembled the phone records and travel data into something actionable. A laptop is open. Notes are ready. A recording device is armed. There is a rule in social engineering. The moment you get what you came for, you do not celebrate. You keep the target talking. Navalny speaks first. He identifies himself as calling from the office of Nikolai Patrushev, Secretary of Russia's Security Council. He says he is conducting a review of the operation. He needs a debrief. There is a beat, one of those microseconds of silence where an entire life could pivot in either direction. Kudryavtsev bites. He starts talking. For nearly 49 minutes, the machinery that tried to erase a man explains itself aloud. Navalny asks about failures the way a middle manager asks about missed KP is. What went wrong? What was the follow-up protocol? Where exactly was the agent applied? Kudryavtsev answers like an employee trying to demonstrate competence to an invisible superior. The underwear, the crotch area, the inner lining. He describes the expectation. Navalny would die mid-flight, somewhere over Siberia. He credits the emergency landing in Omsk and the quick response of local medics for saving the target. He describes the cleanup team, retrieving clothing from the Omsk hospital, scrubbing traces, trying to rewind time before anyone tested for Novichok. He is not confessing out of remorse. He is confessing because he believes he is reporting to a superior. He believes he is safe. And that is the punchline of modern intelligence. The hardest asset to protect is not a weapons cache or a border crossing. It is an ego on autopilot, eager to please. Navalny hangs up. The recording drops. The world hears an FSB-linked officer narrate a nerve agent assassination attempt in the exact tone of a man filing a travel expense claim. And Putin's earlier line, "We would have finished the job," stops sounding like bravado and starts reading like a confession he did not realize he made. Russia does not admit anything. It escalates. In October 2021, Russia designated Bellingcat a foreign agent. In July 2022, Russia's Prosecutor General declared Bellingcat undesirable, a legal classification describing the organization as a threat to Russia's constitutional order and security. That phrase matters. It is legal. It is punitive. It transforms collaboration with Bellingcat into a criminal act on Russian soil. Information becomes contraband. The pressure does not stop at labels. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the figure linked in reporting to the Wagner mercenary network, files a defamation lawsuit against Higgins in London's High Court. A suit designed not to win, but to drain. Legal siege as paper poisoning. The court strikes it out in 2022. But the lesson lands regardless. When you cannot kill the story, you try to bankrupt the storyteller. Higgins adapts. He travels differently. He checks hotel rooms differently. He takes threat assessments seriously because he has spent a decade documenting, in granular detail, what happens when powerful men feel exposed. And still, he stays at the laptop, because the truth about this era is brutal and almost hopeful at the same time. You do not need a badge to investigate a state secret. You need patience, standards, and the willingness to be called delusional until the evidence starts calling you right. Then you need the stamina to keep going after you win, because winning only means the next operation is already in motion. Navalny returns to Russia in January 2021 and is arrested the moment he steps off the plane. He spends the following years in prisons and penal colonies, writing, filming smuggled messages, and joking because humor is the last thing a cell cannot confiscate. On February 16, 2024, Russian authorities report Navalny dead in an Arctic penal colony. The men identified in the investigation face no trial in Russia. No one in the Kremlin says yes, but the recording exists. A voice, a method, a 49-minute window where the cat forgot the bell was already ringing. And in Leicester, a blogger who was never supposed to matter keeps working, because somewhere another operation is already moving, another digital trail is cooling, and the only question is whether it gets found before it disappears. If you want to see how quiet persistence can dismantle powerful enemies from the inside, watch our video on Ron Stallworth's infiltration of the Ku Klux Klan. Different era, different tools, same principle. Courage to keep going when no one thinks you can win.